one of the things that, and Oklahoma has always, in my opinion, played what is a very, very good schedule as far as non-conference schedule. They've been on the road. They've played pretty much everybody home and away. But this year, I think, is at Arkansas State, SMU, and Tulsa. Is there 3 non-conference games to help them get started? And so that will be an interesting start for them. There is no other Power 5 type school on their schedule early on, which they usually do, whether it's been Ohio State or it's been Florida State or if it's been Tennessee or whoever in the past. But that's an interesting start.
I mean, they should probably be 5-0 heading into the Texas game. Mm-hmm. I mean, you got home against Arkansas State should be a win. SMU at home should be a win, although that could get, maybe interesting with SMU's offense, although they're replacing Tanner Mordecai. So I don't know what that looks like Preston Stone-wise, if he's going to be, just geared up and throwing it all over the place. But you'd think that, Oklahoma at home beats SMU. Tulsa, I mean, come on. Then road trip to Cincinnati. Now, that could get squirrely, potentially. But coming off the year Cincinnati had and losing Luke Fickell, I mean, I'm not exactly, looking at that the same way. Let's be honest. So, right now I would take Oklahoma, but first time going to Cincy in this new era. I mean, maybe that gets weird. And then Iowa State at home. Iowa State can't really afford to be any worse than they were. They should be better. But in Norman, yes, they give Oklahoma fits. That could they could potentially go sideways. But if you're just looking at Oklahoma and you are looking at the logo, they should be 5-0 heading into the Texas game. Not a guarantee by any means, but it does set up that way.
By the way, remember there was a couple of things you hear that a school or two was trying to maybe put their foot down, that they didn't want to have to play any of the incoming 4 in a road game. Texas is not playing any of them other than Houston. It's not UCF, it's not Cincinnati, and it's not Brigham Young on the road, although they're playing some, of course, of those incoming schools. There was another note that who's Oklahoma's biggest nemesis outside? And, of course, they've run the table most of the time. This year got obliterated or last season by Oklahoma. Who has been the one that's just kind of gotten under their skin? Who's bothered them the most out in the Big 12? Kansas State, not on their schedule this year.
Yeah. That was a bad matchup for that team last year.
Over the
especially
years,
but it's especially this last year. Kansas State was just a bad matchup for OU. And
they got a pretty easy schedule now that you look at it. They really do. They look like they have a pretty easy schedule.
It will all depend on who's better this year than they were last year. They do have the game at home against TCU, and by then maybe TCU, of course, has a lot to replace from the team that went to the college football championship game.
Cincinnati on the road, like I said, with Oklahoma being 5-0 heading into Texas. I mean, on paper, I would pick Oklahoma. So then Iowa State, I mean, on paper, I'd pick Oklahoma, and then you got Texas, and Texas will be interesting. And then you have a bye. So they could very well be 5-1 or 6-0 heading into the bye week if they just handle their business as favorites. And then UCF, I would imagine they'll probably be favored. That's a home game. Kansas on the road. I mean, Kansas is not same old Kansas, so there is that. But still, I mean, I would think Oklahoma beats Kansas. Bedlam, I mean, who the heck knows? I mean, obviously that's back-to-back road games, but West Virginia at home, I think that plays into their favor. Mm-hmm. Brigham Young on the road. I mean, I'm not really fearing Brigham Young this year, but it's Provo, and we saw last year with Baylor. I mean, if it's on a Saturday night, then maybe that gets really wild and crazy.
That could be a weather game, too.
Late in the year, so, I mean, maybe that is a lot more challenging. And then, TCU to close it out. But, I mean, as far as, favorites, they'll probably be favored in, assuming a step up, they'll be favored in basically every game you would think except for Texas and TCU and possibly one other like an Oklahoma State in that Bedlam game, but that's the start of November. So, I mean, if you're just going to have favorites go, then that could work well for OU.
Yeah, they should be favored in 9 or 10.
Yeah.
Those games.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
9 if
Absolutely.
not 11, like, but we don't know what's going to happen by the time they get to Texas. They could be favored in that one. I would think Texas probably, based on the way like we've talked about their schedule, no matter what happens with Alabama, they're going to be favored in that game. But again, we didn't even know. Like, they have 9 or 10 minimum games that they'll be favored in on that schedule. Much like their Texas schedules kind of line up easily that way. Texas,
Maybe they've both already written the big fat check, and
must have.
this
They
is
must
part of
They don't certainly want any payback in this schedule. That's for sure. I
but
mean,
Texas will be favored in 11 of the games, or 10 or 11, because they're not going to be favored in the Alabama game on any planet in any like multiverse right now. Even though everybody thinks that both those teams are going to be really good, but Oklahoma's the only other game that they would not be favored in on the rest of their schedule.
Ryan McCulloch, I think it is. He's an Oklahoma fan, logo next to his name. We were supposed to play Georgia this year.
Yeah.
And the SEC canceled it. So that was another one that, boy, would that have been interesting. And I think would have been great. Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabama, Texas early on, a fantastic way to kind of get a measuring stick for who they are.